Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
You know, it seems that quite a few dentists are purchasing practices right now, whether it's a second, third, or fourth location, or a newer practitioner, or maybe someone who's been associating, buying their first office. And I say it seems like that because we've had quite a few clients purchasing practices or newer clients who are in the process of purchasing one. Now, when you're purchasing a practice, there's definitely a right and a wrong way to go about it. And just to be clear, by right and wrong, I mean the right way is going to give you the least amount of headaches and be the smoothest transition, whereas the wrong way is going to give you obviously a ton of headaches, but potentially have long-term implications that might take a couple years to overcome to get back to sort of square zero. So for this week's episode, we wanted to cover the 10 biggest mistakes when it comes to practice purchase. My name is Jeff Blumberg, and I'm your host, and I'm joined this week by Sabri Blumberg, our Deputy Chief Operating Officer. I think we have you set up over there, Sabri.
I am. I'm ready.
Excellent. And for those of you that don't know Sabri, if you've been listening for a while, you do know Sabri. Sabri is in charge of all of our technical delivery. She's probably our most skilled individual and executive when it comes to practice management. And Sabri, I think we were talking earlier, you mentioned that you've been involved in how many practice purchase evaluations you've been involved in?
Oh, goodness. Well over 500 over the years.
This is where a client or a doctor is coming to you saying, what do you think of this office?
Correct. Giving me the specifics on buying a practice for a site check. Is this the right practice to buy?
Right, which is why we had you pick the 10 biggest mistakes.
Yes.
Because you've seen quite a few of these.
Yes. And these are not hypothetical mistakes. These are the mistakes I see over and over and over.
All right. So I think we should just jump into it.
Sounds
right?
good.
So let's just go through these, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm hoping as we go through them is we could talk about them a little bit because we may have listeners in the process of purchasing a practice right now.
Sure.
And it might be something where hopefully they don't have to pull the plug on it unless it's a bad deal.
Sure.
But they can sort of use it to steer their situation a little bit.
Right.
And obviously, guys, look, everybody is responsible for their own condition. This is something where, you have to use your best judgment as far as how do you want to apply this or not.
Correct.
I have to throw that little disclaimer in.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And if I can throw a little disclaimer in here, the things we came up with, like the biggest mistakes we've seen from practical experience, don't necessarily include the things if you're buying a second or third or fourth location. There's additional mistakes.
Right.
But you've already done a podcast on that, and that's why we excluded them.
The do's and don'ts of a second location.
Correct.
Like building your new office across the street from your old office.
Correct.
Yeah,
so I want to make very sure that if somebody's listening to this, who is applying what we're telling them to do here to buying additional locations, already have a primary office, they should listen to that podcast as well.
And it's in addition to this. Yeah, and I think that's great. All right, so what's the number one biggest thing that you see? Number one, well, maybe this isn't the biggest mistake, but I know you wanted to do it in a little bit of a sequence here. So what's the first one we want to cover?
Correct. And then one isn't more traumatic than the other one necessarily, but the first mistake I wanted to go over is buying too much practice.
Buying too much practice.
Right.
Is this like where you have somebody buy too much house?
Yeah, but it's more difficult than that because when you're buying too much house, the only thing you're looking at is can I afford the payments?
Right.
When you're buying too much practice is can I grow this thing?
Okay.
Right. Or even maintain the numbers that it was doing or keep it profitable.
Would this have to do with the individual doctor owner's, level of experience, skill set, things of that nature?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So there's two things you want to look at when buying a larger practice, and we're talking about an existing location that you're buying, obviously.
That's assuming they can compete with corporate for the $1 billion corporate is going to. I'm kidding. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. If it's a big practice.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, the first thing I would look at is the doctor has to realize that when you're buying a larger practice that has multiple hygienists, maybe multiple providers, maybe even specialists, a lot of operatories, and is already doing higher numbers, it's to keep it profitable is not necessarily dependent upon their skill as a dentist.
All right.
Or their ability to do dentistry. To keep it profitable and expanding and keep people producing and making sure that what they are producing, there's a profit margin associated with that, is 100% dependent upon your executive skill.
Interesting.
Right. And even if the practice has a manager that's taking care of that, if you don't know how to do that and that manager goes skiing and breaks their legs, you have a problem. So you need to have some management skill if you are buying a larger practice, and not only have management skill, have the time built into your schedule to practice that management skill.
Interesting.
Right. Because that's what's going to make practice like that profitable. It's not just you can hang up a shingle and do dentistry and make money off your own production. You're making money off of other people's labor, and that's management.
Right. Yeah, and that sort of marries up with the philosophy we have here with clients. Normally, if someone's doing fairly low numbers, the first areas we're going to attack with them is attack's the wrong word. It seems very aggressive. Address is their marketing and sales skill.
That's right.
Because you'll have somebody come in here doing $25,000 a month, going, I have organizational issues. Well, there's nothing to really organize yet.
Right.
You got to get them selling and producing.
Right.
And marketing. Then they have something to organize, and then as the practice starts to grow, now you have organizational issues. Whereas in this case, you're talking about, I'm buying an office that's already productive. Well, I have to know my organizational skills.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So that's one part. And then the other side of that is, when you're buying a practice, it needs to be profitable, right? When you're buying a larger practice, you're hoping to make money, not just go to work and say that you own this practice. I mean, so the mistake I see made is not really taking a look at what is the owner dentist that currently owns the practice contributing to the production.
Okay.
Right. And what I mean with that is, let's say that I have a setup where I have associates, hygienists, practice is doing $200-300 a month, right? Or maybe even 150. But the owner, the current owner, is doing 70 or 50% of that production by doing larger cases, or maybe even doing 30% of that production by doing larger cases. And that's where the profit margin is in the practice. It's on the larger cases that the doctor is doing.
All right.
And you don't do larger cases. Or you're going to have to hire somebody to do these larger cases.
So I have an office I'm buying. The doc does a lot of FMRs.
Yes.
I can't do FMRs, or I'm not confident in my ability to do FMRs. So I think, well, no problem.
Yeah.
I'll have that doc stay on, or I'll hire somebody who can do that.
Right. But that comes with a tremendous price tag.
Right.
You're going to have no money left, right? Or you are going to be working for free. So, so you really have to bear down into, how is this practice making money? And are you going to be able to continue it that way, or do you want to?
Right. That makes sense. And that's why we've always been big proponents of, buy a starter, a fixer-upper, get it going. If you're going to be in there, because it's easier, in our opinion at least, to buy a practice doing $30,000 a month and scale it to $100, $200 a month.
Correct, with a great profit margin.
As opposed to buying that $200,000-300,000 a month practice, which again, you're going to be competing with corporate for, they're going to pay $1 million for, or zillions of dollars for. Yeah. Sorry, zillions.
Zillions.
Yeah. Yeah. Zillions. But if I buy that, you walk in from day one with sort of you're under the gun, because you've got this humongous overhead that you got to meet.
That's exactly right. And you immediately inherit all the management problems, and you immediately inherit all the management mistakes that were made by the previous owner that you now have to fix. And it's not good. You have to be ready to do that.
That makes sense. All right. So that's the first mistake. What's our second one?
Second one is it looks like you're buying something, but you're actually buying nothing, right?
Okay,
and
you're
that's
going to explain that. You're buying nothing.
So when you're buying an existing practice, the reason why you want to buy an existing practice, or the consideration behind buying an existing practice versus buying a scratch practice or doing a scratch
practice
is, in a scratch practice, you got nothing.
Sure.
And you're just buying equipment and things like that. And you have to put marketing money and things like that. And, so you have nothing when you're doing a scratch practice except facility.
Right.
Right? But when you're buying an existing practice, you can also buy nothing. If it has a patient base, but the doctor that you're buying it from, let's say that they were extremely good at sales. Let's say that they were a very proficient doctor, so they did their own implants. They didn't refer anything out.
So they're doing all their implants, endo, everything.
Correct. The joy of buying an existing practice is there's all that repeat business. You have built-in treatment plans you're working on, sales that can potentially happen. But if the person before you, the doctor before you, has already cannibalized all of that, you got nothing left. So you're essentially buying a hygiene schedule.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm buying this office. There's little to no work to do in the charts.
Yeah.
So I'm essentially, it looks good, and I'm going to pay a premium because that owner doctor was super productive.
Correct. And you can usually catch that by low amount of active patients, like 500 active patients, but the production is high.
Interesting.
And that's how you know, like this person, and they're getting like 10 new patients a month. We've got 500 active charts, and this person's doing 90,000 a month.
So this would be a great associate prospect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This would be, I mean, this person who's running this practice is a good owner and a good dentist and a good salesperson, right? Well, you're buying nothing from this person. They've already used it all.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Right.
That makes sense.
Big red flag.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so what's our next point?
Overpaying for the practice.
Okay, so now this is a controversial point right now.
Very controversial because
I have to just mention something that the pricing algorithm in Canada is different than in the United States.
Yeah, but even in the United States, depending on where you are in the United States, that algorithm is going to change dramatically.
Well, and also abroad, I'm not familiar with the algorithm in every country used to calculate. I've said this before, that the accepted long-term formula for purchasing practice is 70% of last year's collections. It might be a little higher or lower depending on equipment. But I know what you're seeing, you've been telling me about this, is that's gone completely wacky in certain cases.
Completely insane. And all these new formulas are popping up, right? And when I say formulas, I say that tongue in cheek. Ultimately, when you're buying a business, and that's what you're buying, the business is worth what you're willing to pay for it. Right? That's the bottom line. It's not like buying real estate, right?
Well, is this, and I'm asking your opinion. So where you see these practices that are overvalued, you were telling me about one yesterday where the person wanted over 100% of last year's collections.
Correct. For nothing, for a practice that had no profit.
Right. And it was a small practice too.
It was a small practice.
Like $300,000 a year or something.
Correct.
Like this. So what I'm wondering, because there's the whole corporate algorithm, how they value practice is based on EBITDA, which you could look that up at Investopedia. Very easy. I've explained it in other episodes before. Are these brokers trying to use like valuation formulas from corporate or something like that?
So
for these little dinky practices.
So what they're doing is they're doing creative valuations, right? And this is what you have to
valuations.
I don't know how else to call it. And this is the way you have to, which you have to remember. The broker represents you, and the broker represents the seller.
Which I think is a huge conflict of interest, but whatever.
But ultimately, the broker makes money on how much they're selling the practice for.
Right.
So the broker is going to try to get as much money as they possibly can for that practice, because otherwise that's how they make their money.
And I think, because I know that we've had a few clients deal with some interesting brokers lately.
Yes.
And I don't want to, look, not all brokers some brokers are great, some are not, right? But the thing I guess I would look for if I was dealing with a broker is how many practices have they moved?
Yeah, but not just that. It's ultimately do your own homework on this. Like, how much is this practice worth? How much are other practices in the area selling for? Would be something that I would be aware of, right? So if you're looking at a practice in the United States that is over that's valued over 100%
of last year's collections.
You have a little bit of a red flag there. Another big red flag is the bank won't finance the entire thing, and the seller ends up holding a piece of the note because the bank wouldn't finance the entire thing. Well, unless there's a reason why you are not creditworthy, right?
But then they probably wouldn't do that because they're holding the practice as the asset, so to speak.
Right.
But so I see what you're saying. So in other words, that they're not even willing to agree that the practice is worth that much.
Correct. The bank is saying no, 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 no.
Right.
So I see that happening too. Well, I bought this practice, and the bank is holding the seller is holding a piece of the note, and that immediate is like, oh, like the bank said it wasn't worth that much.
Right.
Right. You overpaid.
Okay. So the 70% number still holds in our opinion.
In my opinion, the 70% number holds. Now, just like anything, prices are driven up by demand.
Right.
So if you're in a high demand area in the United States, again, Canada is completely different. But if you are 70% for most of the United States,
For not a humongous practice.
for just a normal
Right.
practice,
Right.
holds.
Interesting. And by demand, take a look at how many practices are selling in your area. Maybe you're in an area where there's a lot of new residents moving in, so there's a lot of buying pressure, new dentists. We know that in Florida, we've had a lot of docs move to Florida over the last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
So there's more buying pressure in the state.
Correct. And
Yeah.
I see the numbers being driven up by that. I mean, Florida practices used to cost nothing.
Right.
And now they're 70, 80% from what I'm seeing,
Right.
right? Sometimes even higher.
Right.
But when you start hitting over 100, that's when you start having red flags.
That gets ridiculous.
Right.
All right. So we've got overpaying. What's our next point?
Verifying that the active patients are active.
Well, that seems kind of doesn't make sense.
Correct. So I'm
okay, verifying. Sorry.
verifying that the active
patients
patients
are
are
active.
correct.
Got it. Okay.
Right. So, and this again goes back to what are you buying?
And how would we define, like, there's the industry standard definition of 2 years. I've
Yeah.
seen people use 18 months. But how are we defining an active patient?
I think 2 years is fine because usually the practice, if we calculate 2 years
Mm-hmm.
and the practice is 10 years old, well, they didn't lose all the patients, or some of those patients might be reactivatable.
They're around somewhere.
Yeah, they're around, and most of them statistically don't have other dentists. So you can reactivate them.
Let me ask you this, because
Mm-hmm.
this is the big question. So verifying that the active patients are active, how would you do that? So I'm looking at this office. They tell me they have 1,400 active patients.
Yes.
How am I going to verify that?
To verify it through the hygiene schedule. So calculate, like take a look at your procedure report
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and take a look at how many prophies they're doing. And that will tell you how many active patients you actually have.
So if in the last 2 years we've had quote unquote 1,300 active patients, I'm going to want to see how many prophies on the schedule.
You should at least be seeing 1,300 prophies.
That makes sense.
Right? And if people are coming in only once a year, and ordinarily
Well, actually,
you're
that
going to
would
want to
be-
see them more than once a year.
Because technically, if an active patient's in the last 2 years,
Right.
then I may have seen this person 18 months ago for a prophy and haven't seen him since.
Correct.
Right. So
Correct.
then I'm going to want to see at least 1,300 prophies.
Well, I would expect to see at least 1,300 prophies in the last 2 years. But again, that means that people are only coming for the hygiene visit once every 2 years.
It's not very active.
Yeah, that's not a very compliant, active, thriving patient base. So my
Like, what would you
opinion,
want? Yeah.
I would want to see 1,300 a year.
Okay.
That means they're coming in at least once a year,
Got it.
right? I can work on my compliance, right? Some of them are coming twice, some of them are coming once a year, but I would want to see 1,300 a year. Where most of these doctors are getting their active patient numbers is from their software.
Sure.
And that is woefully inaccurate because some people, like it says patients that came in once 10 years ago are still counted as active.
Really?
Yeah, because
Okay.
they're never deactivated, which we don't suggest that you deactivate them if you listen to the earlier one, but that doesn't give you an active patient count.
Right. We've talked about not deactivating. Well, we talked about how to deactivate a patient
Correct.
in a prior episode. But yeah, so if you're not setting your parameters right when you're pulling your report,
Yeah,
so then you're not going to really know who's active and who's not.
that's exactly right.
You want someone who physically showed up in the but that could even get. You could have a person come in for an emergency visit that comes in, they get one PA, you do an exam on them. I guess you could exclude that stuff somehow and you never see them again.
Correct.
But that's not an active patient.
Correct. But again, it kind of evens out in the wash. There's no way to really tell. You're just trying to get a good gauge. So people are not really only coming in once a year for their hygiene visits either. So that's why if you count them once a year, then you make up for the ones, the outliers, and that gets made up by the guys who are coming twice a year. It just gives you a better idea.
That makes sense. So, okay. So to reiterate,
Yeah.
right, just so I'm getting where you're coming from in this,
Yeah.
because I like this, is, so practice broker tells me there's 1,300 active patients.
Yes.
So during my due diligence period, I'm going to be going in the office and looking at this stuff myself.
Correct.
Right? Which obviously, if they wouldn't let me do that, that's a huge red flag, folks. Don't do it, right?
Yeah.
Walk or run away from that one.
Yes.
So I go in and I'm looking through the software. And I go, okay, I'm going to at least want to see 1,300 prophies over the last 2 years.
Right.
Okay, but that's really what you're looking for is you want 1,300 prophies a year.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right, because if everybody's supposed to come in twice a year, how active is that patient base?
Right. The word active is being very loosely applied in that sense otherwise.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's take a look at this next one. Okay, so moving right along. So we've gotten through 4 mistakes. Should I intro these with a number, you think?
If you want to.
Okay, good. So mistake number 5
Very
is there you go.
Not verifying that the accounts receivable is adjusted. So what does that mean? That means that if you are buying an existing practice and you are assuming the accounts receivable as part of that, well, there's normal formulas on how you pay for that accounts receivable, right? But some people don't have, if they're taking PPOs or other insurance plans, they don't have the adjusted fees in their computer. So the computer is going to bill out their private fee and it gets adjusted after the insurance check has been received.
I see. So I'm billing for a $1,400 crown and I haven't been paid yet. So that's going to show up as $1,400
on your accounts receivable.
When I'm really only going to get $800.
Correct. And if you're paying a percentage of what's left in accounts receivable and you're paying for that, you're going to be paying too much. So you need to make sure the numbers are adjusted.
Do you still see that happen a lot today?
Yeah,
really?
I do.
Interesting.
I
do.
Fair
enough.
All these things I listed, I think are actually happening today.
But also the other aspect that is a lot of cases when a person is accepting PPOs, I know not always, they usually enter the PPO fee schedule into the system so that it's not necessarily reflected in the ARs.
Okay, so yes, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I agree with what you're saying, that is the way, what you're saying is the way it's supposed to be being done.
I guess the question I really wanted to ask you is how often, because you would think otherwise.
At least half the time.
Wow. Because that would drive myself insane if I didn't have those fees in there.
Right. But you take a look at why people's sales break down or why they end up with a big patient portion or things like that when managing a practice is because they're doing this. They don't have it properly set up in their computer.
So you're saying half the time with these practice purchases, the ARs consist of uncollectible monies because it's too high of a fee for the fee schedule they're supposed to be charging.
That's correct, because half the practices still today do not have the plans entered in their software, so it's going to automatically happen.
Wow, that's rough.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. All right, and I'll give my mistake intro now. Now we have mistake number 6.
Not making the contract specific enough.
All right, so the buy-sell agreement, I've agreed to purchase this practice.
Yes.
And, that's going to dictate how I'm going to buy it and
Correct.
things of this nature. So what are the specifics you see that tend to go missing?
Well, how the transition is going to work, right? So I'm purchasing from a doctor, and part of what I'm purchasing is the goodwill.
Right.
So that needs to be transferred to me.
Sure.
So exactly what are the selling doctor's responsibilities in making sure that transfer happens successfully? What letters are they going to be sending out?
Right.
How often? Who approves these letters? Are we doing it before? After? 3, 2, how many?
I see.
Right.
I see. How is it going to be introduced? What's the doctor going to say?
Correct.
Yeah. Including what am I going to say to patients?
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct. If the doctor is retaining a practice, so let's say that they are selling a practice, but they still have a practice.
Sure.
Even if that practice is outside of the normal competitive zone, like 20 miles away.
Right. Depending on your area, obviously.
Right. A lot of people will drive 20 miles for a dentist that they really, really love.
That's true.
Right. So is it specified in the contract how that's going to work?
Sure.
If one of the patients wants to transfer over or calls in, right? What reasonable efforts are going to be made to keep that patient with the practice that you just sold?
That makes sense.
Right. The other thing is if the doctor is semi-retiring and you're keeping that doctor on as an associate or keep him on for a transition period, exactly how is that going to work? Because everybody's going to want to see that doctor because that's the doctor they know.
Right.
So what you see happening is you see the selling doctor have all the production and you're paying 35% for it, which means that essentially they're making more money now as an associate than they were making as an owner. Plus they get paid for it and you're starving.
Right.
Right.
You get to service the debt at least to that doctor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And if you overpaid, you have a note that they're holding too.
What a
It's
great
wonderful. Right.
And you bought the ARs, which had tons of PPOs in it with the wrong fee.
Well, I see that
You know,
stuff,
I know,
and
it's
it's just
it's terrible.
sad.
So now, question about this,
Yes.
because then, and I'm thinking, I know that you and I have discussed this before. So normally, we're going to suggest that the client put that. So in addition to specifying these things in the buy-sell agreement,
Yes.
we're going to suggest that, strongly suggest that they get this doctor on an associate contract of some kind as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I consider for the clients that I work with, that's considered a must.
Right.
Right? Because there's so many pitfalls in not doing it. And you have to discuss the details on that. And if you're going to be retaining this doctor as an associate, that's going to dramatically alter your profit level. So you have to take a look at that when you're purchasing. Can I afford that?
Sure. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Plus also, what if, let's say the transition's supposed to take a year.
Yeah.
And the doctor's going to start cutting back after 6 months.
Yeah.
And that's the agreement. And we have the pay all worked out. And
Yeah.
I can justify an associate. And
Yeah.
all works. And we've worked out how it's going to be turned over to me, the letters that are going to go out, how I'm going to be introduced to patients, all that jazz.
Yeah.
But then 2 months in, I realized there's no way I can continue working with this person.
Right.
But that's why I need the associate contract too, because then it stipulates what this doctor can and can't do and how I would let this doctor go. It stipulates what we do if it doesn't work out.
That's exactly right. And if you want the doctor to stay for the transition, but there's not enough work for two doctors, right? Which is very often the case. Otherwise, that practice would have ordinarily had an associate.
Sure.
What is going to be your role, and what specifically are you paying the doctor to do for you now?
Sure.
And the main thing that it might be easier to pay him a daily flat fee, not have him finish his cases, but not take on any new one. But their main responsibility is transitioning the patients and introducing the patients to you. So maybe go in with, the best thing, do you remember that transition that we saw? This is years ago. You're going to know who I'm talking about when I start describing it. But what the doctor did is the selling doctor stayed on, but their main responsibility was to introduce all the patients. I know you remember
because
this.
then during recall exams, let me have you meet so-and-so. The new doc was on the website. There were plenty of letters that went out.
Right.
Yeah, it was a very, very well done transition. And the selling doctor, in my opinion, took a lot of responsibility on that.
Yeah, it was great. But most people don't look at it that way, unfortunately. So that's why you're going to have to spell it out in a contract like that. It's an agreement that they're bound to observe.
Yeah, and that's just something to think within any contract, because you see a lot of business agreements go bad this way, or an operating agreement, an LLC that doesn't spell it out, or a buy-sell agreement that's supposed to be in place, or some type of a buyout agreement in a business is, we work things out as to what we're going to do when things work out.
Yes.
But we don't take a look at what do we do if things don't work out.
Correct.
And then we assume that we'll just, be reasonable about it.
Right.
But then what someone's idea of something and your idea of something could be completely divergent. Doesn't mean one person's right or wrong, because again, that's a matter of opinion in that sense. What's the right and wrong way to do a business transition? But if you don't spell it out, you have no agreement.
Correct.
This is the key. Okay, good. I like that. All right, so let's move on to our next one. Number 7.
Okay, number 7 is not checking to see if the practice has Delta Premier.
All right, so this is more of a United States issue.
This is
right?
very much a United States issue. So for all the American...
And just for those, the non-American docs listening, those listening abroad or up in Canada, Delta Premier is a type of managed care insurance plan through Delta Dental.
That's correct. And it has a higher reimbursal than the Delta PPO.
Right.
Right. And it doesn't exist anymore
Right,
in that it got canceled. But the people who were already on that plan got to keep it.
So now
Right.
how would this be a problem? So let's take a scenario.
Yes.
I'm a doctor.
Yeah.
I'm a Delta Premier provider.
Yeah.
I've been practicing for 22 years or however long. And you're going to buy my practice.
Correct.
So now let's say, 60% of my practice is Delta Premier.
Right, which I've seen. So 60, and I saw with the practice in California last year. So the practice is producing a certain number. It has a profit margin because of that production at a certain level. And the value of the practice is determined based upon those factors.
Right.
Except the doctor who was selling was grandfathered into the Premier program and was getting reimbursements for the crowns at Premier fees, which are close to, in certain cases, private fees.
So let's play this out. So let's say that's me.
Yes.
I've got this practice. I'm getting close to my normal fee.
Let's say you're
through
getting
Delta
$1,000 or $1,100 for a crown.
and my crown fee is normally $1,250.
Correct.
All right, so that's not too bad. I'm doing
It's okay. Keep Premier.
Right.
Nothing
so
wrong
I've
with
got
that.
Premier. It's basically a 10% write-off. Not a big
It's
deal.
a marketing fee.
Right. So then you're going to come in and buy my practice.
Correct.
So what happens?
Well, I am never going to qualify for Premier because it doesn't exist anymore. You were grandfathered in. So I'm going to I'm going to retain those patients. I can still see those patients.
Sure.
But I can only accept, or they will only pay me the Delta PPO fees, which in some cases are anywhere from as low as $600 to, if you're really lucky, $800.
So you're going to take it without even thinking with this. That let's say that the practice has been valued at $1 million.
Yes.
Or let's say $500 million. $1 million,
Yeah.
round number. But you're going to be taking on 60% of the patients you're seeing immediately a 20 or 30% haircut.
Yeah.
The second you walk in the door, if you continue doing what I was doing.
Correct. Just doing the exact same thing you're doing, which if you buy a practice, you at least want to be making money doing the
Right.
exact same thing you're doing.
But you could do that almost inadvertently then. You walk in, you start working, you find out all of a sudden you can't be a Delta Premier provider. You didn't know this.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're taking a $200,000 to $300,000 a year loss.
Correct. And now you're upside down.
Wow.
Right. So,
Okay. So that's something to watch out for.
very much so. So that's,
So how would you handle that? So just out of curiosity, would you price that into the purchase price?
that's exactly right. It lowers the value of the practice.
And you point that out via the broker? Or
Correct.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so now we've gotten through 7.
Yeah.
3 to go. All right, so what's number 8?
Okay, so this is more of a due diligence kind of thing, right? So you have to make sure that as part of your due diligence that you check the procedure codes, right? And we went over this earlier on procedure codes. You want to check to make sure that you verify the active numbers by checking the amount of profis that are being done. But you want to see how is this doctor that you're buying from making their production numbers. For example, I'm looking at procedure codes and, 30% of this person's income or the selling doctor's income is being made by implants.
Okay.
Okay, I don't do implants. I'm going to be referring them out. I'll restore them. That's a problem.
Sure.
Right? The doctor I'm buying from has a philosophical difference than I do with regards to the way that they do crowns, for example.
So different clinical approach.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. There's no right or wrong on this. It's just a different approach.
Sure.
So the doctor I'm buying from is doing a build-up on every single crown that they're doing because that's their clinical philosophy. But that's what's making the crown profitable.
I see.
So it's the build-up that's making the crown profitable. And I do not believe I need to do a build-up on every crown because I have a different philosophical approach.
I see.
Right. So the bottom line is you just need to verify the procedure codes to make sure that there's no clinical differences or with regards to philosophy or capability or comfort level or anything like that. Right.
That makes sense. All right, so let's take a look at our next one here. But, before I get into that, I do want to mention something. And I meant to mention this earlier in the episode. You have a practice acquisition checklist.
I do.
That you made.
Yeah.
And it's, how many pages is this? Probably 5 or 6, maybe 7 pages.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's 5 pages. 5-page checklist that if we have a client looking at purchasing a practice, you have them actually follow this checklist to figure out whether it's a good deal or not.
Yeah, especially if they're buying multiple practices. Like some people are just picking up multiple practices right now. So they're looking at a lot of practices. Well, they need to learn for themselves how to evaluate these practices.
So let's say I'm a client and I go, hey, Sabri, I'm looking at buying this office. Would you have me fill one of these out?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a really good checklist to figure out if this is a good deal or not, and it properly evaluated, and it
Correct.
covers a lot of the issues we run into. We're going to make that available as a download on the episode webpage. If you want it, you'll find it on the episode webpage. Just click it, you fill out a form, and you can download it and use it for yourself. And if you have questions for Sabri later, you send her a copy of the checklist.
And I seriously advise you, if you're looking at a practice, to look at this checklist, even though it has a lot of issues that we're simply not able to cover
Sure, of
in a
course.
podcast, right? But they're all important.
That makes sense.
So
Makes sense.
download it, take a look at it.
All right, good. So let's move on to problem number 9, or I'm sorry, not problem, mistake number 9. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
So, and this is just kind of an odd one, but you want to make sure that when you are purchasing a practice, if you are going to be keeping the staff, that staff transition is handled properly.
Now, what would you consider properly versus improperly?
Well, I mean, on the far side of the pendulum of improper would be not informing the staff that you're selling the practice until the practice is sold and a new doctor shows up. So that would be the one side of the pendulum, right? And I've seen that happen, and it's upsetting, right, for two staff.
Have you ever seen it? Just because I remember seeing a case like this where the owner doctor didn't tell the staff that he had sold.
Yes.
Like until a couple of months after the new doctor owner was there.
Yes.
Was the quote unquote associate.
Yes.
And it was a little awkward because the staff kept coming to the old owner doc with questions, this, that, virtually ignoring the associate.
Right, thinking that they're just an associate. But that's actually better than the worst that I saw. The worst that I saw is the doctor never informed the staff that they were selling. And then the new doctor takes possession, shows up, the old doctor is gone, and the new staff doesn't know that the practice is sold.
Okay.
Right? So...
Yeah, but if I'm the seller, that's great. I don't have to talk to the staff ever again. I guess
right. Well, I mean, if you can get away with it,
Bye.
It does eliminate a lot of work.
Yeah, that's kind of terrible. All right, so what do you recommend here?
Well, it kind of depends. This requires a conversation. Again, it's all about having the agreement in place before the purchase is agreed to, or the final approval is given for the purchase of the practice. So there needs to be some agreements in place on how this transition is going to work and how the staff's going to be informed, and how there might be specific staff that the selling doctor is worried about. Well, there might be a conversation on how that's going to be handled.
Well, I guess you may have situations too when you're evaluating, that you have some staff that are just grossly overpaid. You're going to have to adjust that. I know in certain cases when the new doctor takes over, like some of these benefit plans may change, things of that nature. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because those things are on the checklist, because sometimes you find that the practice is being held together by a fantastic office manager who has been around for a very long time. And because they've been there a long time and have been very good to the existing doctor, they're getting 6 weeks paid vacation a year with a very high salary. And really, that office manager, just like the doctor that they're with, is coming in for a landing, right? So it might not be as productive as they were 5 years ago.
Sure. Okay, fair enough. All right, so obviously we would want the staff to know before the new owner doctor comes in, ideally.
Correct. Well, no, it's a must. And the introduction or the handing over the baton to the new doctor needs to be figured out.
Now, the only thing I'd throw out there about that, just is more I'm being, devil's advocate here, or as a question, is the way these practice purchases work. It's not like a house where I'm going to lose my earnest money. I mean, I guess you could structure a deal that way, but in most cases, I can bail up to the final day I'm supposed to close.
Yeah, there's absolutely zero repercussion.
Right. So here's, I guess, my question. So let's say 2 weeks prior, we've told the staff, I've evaluated everything, blah, blah. Let's say I'm buying a practice from you. I've met your staff. I've done all these things, blah, blah, blah. Then the day before I'm supposed to close, I come up with something that I consider to be a award of some kind. Really, it shouldn't be a deal breaker. And I go, you know what, Sabri, I'm not buying this office.
Right.
Well, that kind of throws things a little bit out of
Absolutely, 100%. And I was talking to a broker actually last week who informed me that 60% of the practice sales fall through, the first one.
6-0
falls through. Now, I haven't verified those percentages, but that's what I was told by a broker last week. And I do believe that it's high, how many fall through. So now, this is more of a seller's issue than a buyer's issue.
Sure.
But as a seller, what I would do, I mean, there's no rules. You can do whatever you want to. But if I was selling, I probably wouldn't inform the staff until we got closer to actual, like it being a firm deal, so to speak.
Right. Financing's verified. Everything's in line.
No major issues have come up. We seem to be, completely in agreement with the way this this is going to work. And by the time I inform my staff when this deal is solid, so to speak, or solid as it could be, I'm going to want to put some money down on that. And you could have to just have that written into the contract. Like when I inform my staff, I want $10,000 non-refundable, that this thing's going to close. And if you don't close, and I have to put up with the additional work you're creating by placating.
Here's a bonus.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry about that, folks. Here's 10 grand.
Well, you know what? At that point in time, from my viewpoint as a seller, damage has been done.
That's true.
Right? So I'm going to want some compensation to make up for my damage. I also want to make sure that the person who's buying it, if I'm going to take irreversible steps, is for sure.
No.
So this is more of a seller's viewpoint.
Makes sense. I like that advice.
Again, you can do whatever you want to. There are no rules. It's whatever you put in your contract.
Right. Yeah. Key point.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We get to our last point.
Yes.
Which, by the way, I think I should mention this as well. This is just from my end of the stick. I know you've seen this too. A lot of brokers are going to have some type of a sale agreement, right? Or a buy. It's not really a buy-sell agreement. It's more like a sale agreement, right? Some type of a purchase agreement. Okay, so they're going to give you a basic purchase agreement that you're going to use to purchase this practice with, right? Usually the broker provides it. Now, keep in mind, you're normally the broker is normally representing the seller.
Yes.
So, to sort of, lay this out. So if I'm selling you my practice, my broker is the one providing you with a sale agreement or a purchase agreement, right? To purchase the practice. I would highly advise the buyer to have their own attorney that they're working with to review this. 100%. And ideally, you want somebody who doesn't just know business, but maybe has a little bit of insight into dentistry, because there might be certain aspects that the lawyer isn't thinking with if they don't understand at least healthcare. They should understand healthcare.
For sure. And that's good advice.
Yeah, good point.
Right.
All right, we get to our last point. Last biggest mistake, and I see you kind of grouped this one up, which is number 10.
Not paying attention to red flags.
Okay, so red flags, some type of a problem that comes up while we're trying to do the purchase. What are some basic ones you've seen?
The selling doctor is sending you unreasonable emails at 6 o'clock in the morning that are 5 pages long every day.
Talking about?
Yes.
Or texts.
Yeah, or text.
Yeah.
Right. Those are red flags.
Yeah.
Like there's something wrong here.
Especially if you're going to keep the seller on board afterwards.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or just weird stuff starts happening, or things are just not adding up, or data's not adding up, or the person's being cagey. Like everybody has their little spidey sense. I don't know how else to put it.
No, I know what you're saying. It's a perception, an idea.
Right. It's like maybe not necessarily. Right. It might not be backed up by fact.
Sure.
But what I found is usually that people, there's a reason people have gut feelings and they're ordinarily correct.
Right.
So in this case, where there's smoke, there's fire applies. If there are red flags or you do see smoke, you have to invest. You cannot ignore these things, because 90% of the time it turns out that after you close, you find out you were exactly right.
Interesting.
Right? So listen to yourself. And that's true. That's good advice for anything.
Well, and I think especially, what about, because, you don't always have a lot of direct interaction with the seller.
Correct.
As the buyer,
Yeah.
depending on how good the broker is.
Yeah.
I've seen it where the broker sort of breaks down as a conduit, and the buyer and the seller are just talking directly.
Correct.
Which fine. But if you're finding, this is someone that's going to stay on for 6 months to a year, you have to get along to some degree with this person.
Absolutely.
If it's a problem, during the purchasing process, and you find that it's just becoming, well, I thought you said this. No, you said that.
Right.
It's probably not going to work.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
You're going to have an issue. So, pay attention to red flags. Listen to yourself, right? If this isn't the practice for you, the right practice for you is out there. Don't buy something that's going to give you grief later.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Like we can get this tunnel vision, like I must have it, I must have it, I am buying this. And then it's just a mistake.
No, because, the purchase is the easiest part.
That's exactly right. It's like you have to be willing to let it go.
No, that makes sense. Well, Sabri,
yes,
those are your 10 points.
Those are my 10 points, but look at the practice acquisition checklist, because there's a lot more points than 10.
And we have that on the episode webpage. You can download it. And if they have any questions for you as they go through this, do you mind if I put your email address on the episode webpage as well?
Absolutely.
You can email Sabri directly and ask her any questions you have about maybe some of the stuff she covered today. I know obviously there's a wealth of information on this subject. We were only able to hit on the 10 big mistakes, but we're plenty happy to help you with this process as you go through it. So yeah, feel free to email Sabri. You can contact Sabri or you can contact me. All right. So that about does it. Thank you so much for being on.
Welcome. Always fun.
Appreciated. And folks, if you're in the process of buying a practice or you're maybe thinking of buying a practice, definitely keep these things in mind. Don't forget to download the checklist like Sabri said. Otherwise, if you have any questions about MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Have a great week, and we'll see you at the next episode.